What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here on the day of Game 7 with another playoff, not just playoff, but season overview. Today we got 2009-10. Definitely one of my favorite seasons, as the Hawks do win the Stanley Cup this year. Being second, my first full year I consider watching hockey, where I watch every game with my dad every night. 2008, 2009, I'm still 4 years old, so I get bored sometimes, and then I kind of will walk away, and then I'll come back, and that's how kids are. But this is the first year I was fully invested, and what a great year to be invested in. To start off in the Central Division, the Hawks led the way at 52, 22, and 8, 112 points. First time they've had the division lead in this series. Detroit, 44, 24, and 14. First time they don't have the division lead in this series. 102 points for them. Nashville, after falling out last year, barely gets back in this year with a 47, 29, and 6 record for 100 points. St. Louis and Columbus both fall out. St. Louis just barely at 40, 32, and 10 at 90 points. Columbus, 32, 35, and 15 with 79 points. The Chris Mason magic, or Steve Mason magic kind of falls apart there. In the Northwest Division, Vancouver leads the way, 49, 28, and 5 with 103 points. Colorado back in the playoffs. I don't know why I didn't put a dot for them because they fell out last time. But they're back in the playoffs at 43, 30, and 9 as the 8th seed, 95 points, as my eraser falls on the floor. Calgary just out of the playoffs as well, same record as St. Louis at 40, 32, and 10, 90 points. Minnesota, 38, 36, and 8, 89 points. Edmonton bottoms out at 27, 47, and 8 for 62 points. The Pacific Division. San Jose, 51, 20, and 11, leads the division, 113 points. Phoenix. This is when I have an issue with people saying the Coyotes were never competitive. They say the Maple Leafs haven't been competitive since 1967. Maple Leafs are not competitive in this era, but they will be later on. Phoenix was very good in this era. The problem was teams around them have had more experience than them. 50, 25, and 7, 107 points for Phoenix as they make the jump into the playoffs for the first time since before the salary cap era. LA also jumps back in, 46, 27, and 9 with 101 points. First time they've been in the playoffs in this series. Anaheim, out of the playoffs now. This is 3 years removed from a Stanley Cup, 39, 32, and 11, 89 points. Dallas at the bottom of that division with a good record, 37, 31, and 14, 88 points. There's only one true miserable team in the Western Conference, and that's Edmonton. Columbus, you can argue, those are the only two teams under 80 points. So you got 5, you got 4, and you got another 4. That's the majority. This is when I say the Western Conference was a lot better than the Eastern Conference at this time. In the East, New Jersey leads the Atlantic Division, 48, 27, and 10 with 103 points. Pittsburgh, 47, 28, and 7 with 101 points. Philadelphia, 41, 35, and 6, 88 points. And that's a 7th seed with 88 points. They wouldn't have made the playoffs. I mean, St. Louis and Calgary are robbed of being in the playoffs if they were in the Eastern Conference, as well as Minnesota and Anaheim and Dallas. There could have been 5 more teams in the West that would have made the playoffs in the East. The Rangers fall out at 38, 33, and 11, 87 points. Islanders, 34, 37, and 11. A bit better from when they bottomed out in the previous year, 79 points, same as Columbus. Buffalo, 45, 27, and 10 is back in the playoffs, leading the Northeast Division, 100 points. Ottawa back in the playoffs as well, 44, 32, and 6 with 94 points. And then you got Boston and Montreal, 39, 30, and 13 with 91 points. Montreal, 39, 33, and 10, 88 points. Toronto makes some big moves during the season to get better, and they finish dead last in the Eastern Conference, 30, 38, and 14, 74 points. Then the Southeast Division. One team makes the playoffs. Washington wins the President's Trophy, definitely helped by that weak division, 54, 15, and 13, 121 points. Atlanta, 35, 34, and 13, 83 points, only one more year after this. Carolina falls out of the playoffs at 35, 37, and 10, 80 points. Tampa Bay gets a bit better from the previous 2 atrocious years, 34, 36, and 12 with 80 points. Florida, 32, 37, and 13 with 77 points. So, yes, the Western Conference is much better than the East at this point. And before we get to the playoffs, a game happens in this season that is crucial. It's sort of like 2007 Game 82 between New Jersey and the Islanders, which dictated which teams made the playoffs. Toronto beat Montreal, so they were in. The Islanders beat the Devils last second, so they get into the playoffs as the 8th seed. Something similar happened in this year. In Game 82, the Flyers and Rangers played each other for the last playoff spot. Montreal had already clinched at least the 8th seed, so it was between the Flyers and the Rangers for the 7th seed. The game goes to a shootout. The Flyers end up winning that shootout, and they take that 7th seed. Game 82, they qualify, and they go on a run here. So every game is important, as you can see. In the Western Conference playoffs to start, it's number 1 San Jose versus number 8 Colorado. San Jose takes them out in 6, but boy, Colorado put up a fight in that series. Craig Anderson was very good. They were up 2-1 in that series, and Dan Boyle has that iconic own goal in that 0-0 game, and then 51 seconds into overtime gets past Nabokov. But Colorado, Craig Anderson's a big part why they get back in. They fall right back out the next year. It's just not sustainable. That's, of course, and then Chicago and Nashville. Number 2 seed Chicago versus number 7 seed in Nashville. Chicago takes them out in 6. In a series that made me and my dad very uncomfortable. Nashville played very defensively with Barry Trotz as coach. They played frustratingly, and the Hawks could not solve them in games 1 and 3 of that series. They were down 2-1 in that series. Game 4, Niemi was fantastic in that series. Aside from Game 1, Niemi was very good. Game 5, of course, the collapse. They were up 3-1. Nashville takes 4-3. Marion Hossa, the 5-minute major. Kane scores with 13 seconds left shorthanded, and then in overtime, Hossa comes out of the box and scores, and then the Hawks finish up in Game 6, which they were up 3-1, and then they blew that lead, and then, number 3 seeded Vancouver takes out number 6 seeded LA in 6. That was kind of expected. LA, young team. Number 4 seeded Phoenix loses to number 5 seed Detroit in 7. And that one was, looking back, that's frustrating for Phoenix, but that was their best year they've ever had in the regular season. They lose in 7 in the first round to a fading Empire. This is why Detroit kind of doesn't take the hint to rebuild. 2009, they lose in the final. They're really close again. They beat Phoenix in 7 in the first round. If they can win a round, they believe they can get anywhere, and that's a theme that carries over for another 6 years. In the East, number 1 seeded Washington is a 3-1 series lead on 8 seed Montreal. Montreal takes them out in 7 games because Yaroslav Halak becomes a legend and decides, I'm going to stand on my head and win these games single-handedly. And then number 2 seeded New Jersey gets knocked out by number 7 seeded Philly in 5, pretty convincingly. Number 6 seeded Boston takes out number 3 seeded Buffalo in 6 games, and that was a series I wanted Buffalo to win. That was the last time I watched Buffalo in a playoff game. I remember watching Buffalo at home, and I think in game 1 or 2 on the Versus channel. But I remember having a vivid picture of Buffalo with Buffalo Slug jerseys. Pittsburgh and Ottawa, you know what that means? Pittsburgh is a bad matchup for Ottawa, except for 2007. Pittsburgh takes them out in 6. Good fight by the Sens there. But as you can see, we got parallels, absolute opposites in each side of the playoffs. You have 1, 2, 3, and 5 advancing. You have 4, 6, 7, and 8 advancing. Interesting enough. Second round, number 1 seeded San Jose takes on number 5 seeded Detroit. My eyes fluttered for a second. San Jose takes them out in 5. Quick work there. Number 2 seeded Chicago takes out number 3 seeded Vancouver in 6. And this was a better team than the previous year in Chicago. They had a lot more depth in this season, I thought. But same result. The only difference is the Hawks had home ice, and they won some different games. I believe Vancouver won Game 1 in that series pretty good. They won 5-1, and then Games 2, 3, and 4, the Hawks just rattled off after the comeback win in Game 2. In the East, number 4 seeded Pittsburgh defending Stanley Cup champions against number 8 seeded Montreal, who takes them out in 7 as Halak becomes an even bigger story. Number 6 seeded Boston against number 7 seeded Philadelphia. Another reason I chose to upload this video today. Boston has a 3-1 series lead on Philadelphia. Philadelphia wins 4 straight after winning Game 4 in overtime, and Michael Layden becomes the story there. So some interesting goalies here. You got Niemi, you got Nabokov, you got Layden, and you got Halak. Nabokov, I would say, is the best of them. Halak's probably number 2. Niemi 3, and then Layden 4. Yet you see how there was a narrative in this playoffs that came out that you didn't need to pay goaltenders to win. In the Western Conference Final, number 1 seed San Jose plays number 2 seeded Chicago, and Chicago sweeps them in 4. I remember being in Mexico for a wedding, and all of the gentlemen in the wedding party, we all went to the room to watch games 1 and 2, and then game 3, I remember I had some relatives come over for that. And then game 4 was just me and my dad, just like good times. In the Eastern Conference, number 7 seed Philadelphia versus number 8 Montreal. 2 teams with 88 points met in the Eastern Conference Final. You have 113, 112 versus 88 and 88. Philadelphia takes them out in 5. Montreal, the Halak story kind of ends, but he was very good. And Michael Layden kind of becomes the story. So you got Niemi and Layden in the final. Definitely an unexpected goaltending matchup, because Hue was supposed to be the starter, and then Niemi kind of won the job. In the final, number 2 seed Chicago versus number 7 seed Philadelphia. I didn't have to look anything up for this. I memorized this by heart. Game 1, Chicago wins 6-5 in Chicago in the most back-and-forth game I've ever seen in my life. Game 2, Chicago wins 2-1. Ben Eager with the winner in that one. Thomas Kopetsky with the winner in Game 1. Game 3 was kind of hurt a little bit. Claude Giroux gets the OT winner and wins 4-3 for Philadelphia. And I really thought the Hawks were going to win that game after Kane made it 3-2, and then Leno came down the ice. That's another story. A lot of stories in these playoffs. But Leno came right down the ice 20 seconds later and tied the game. Game 4, Philadelphia wins 5-3, and I got scared. Philadelphia dominated 2 periods of that game. And the third period, the Hawks mounted a little comeback that fell short. But I got scared until Game 5 when the doors were blown off the Philadelphia goaltending with a 7-4 victory. Game 6, Chicago wins 4-3 in overtime in a goal that hardly anyone saw go in the net. But me and my dad were very happy men. In the playoffs, Briere leads the way with 23 games, 12 goals, 18 assists, 30 points. Tays, 7 goals, 22 assists, 29 points. He's your Conn Smythe winner. And then Kane, 10 goals, 18 assists, 28 points. The next guy had 5 points less than that, I believe, was Mike Richards. Goal-scoring leaders, I wanted to put this out because Camilleri led the way with goals, and he was done in the Eastern Conference Final. 19 games, 13 goals in those 19 games, 6 assists, 19 points. Camilleri is one of my favorite players when he played. Sharp also had 22 games, 11 goals, 11 assists, 22 points. And Bufflin also had 11 goals in that playoffs. Bufflin becomes a superstar out of these playoffs because of how well he played. He played defense that first round, and then against Luongo, Quenneville puts him right in front of the net. Perfect. Match made in heaven. It was Tays, Kane, and Bufflin for a lot of the remainder of that playoffs. Niemi, 16-6 with a .912 save percentage and a 2.61 goals against. Michael Layden is 8-3 with a .916 save percentage with a 2.46 goals against. Who did he replace? Brian Boucher got injured in the Boston series. 6-6 with a .909 save percentage, 2.47 goals against average. Award winners. Henrik Sedin wins the Art Ross. 29 goals, 83 assists, 112 points for Vancouver. The Masterton goes to Jose Theodore of Washington. The Calder goes to Tyler Myers of the current Vancouver Canucks, but of then was the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo overachieved that year. Ryan Miller was carrying them. Conn Smythe goes to Jonathan Tays of the Chicago Blackhawks, of course. The Selke for the millionth time goes to Pavel Datsyuk of Detroit. The Hart goes to Henrik Sedin for most valuable player in Vancouver. Jack Adams, of course, has to go to Dave Tippett of the Phoenix Coyotes. The Norris goes to Duncan Keith of the Chicago Blackhawks. I believe I have a poster up there with that on it. The Clancy goes to Shane Doan of the Phoenix Coyotes. For the Lady Byng goes to Martin St. Louis. And finally, not Datsyuk, for the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Ted Lindsay goes to Alex Ovechkin for the Players' Most Valuable Player. It's no longer the Pearson Award. The Rocket goes as a tie for Sidney Crosby and Steven Stamkos with 51. The Vezina goes to Ryan Miller, who went 41, 18, and 8 with a .929 save percentage and a 2.29 goals against average. The Jennings, of course, goes to Martin Brodeur with his unlimited hardware of the New Jersey Devils. First team All-Stars. First team is Ovechkin on the left wing, Henrik Sedin down the middle, and Patrick Kane on the right. Duncan Keith and Mike Green on the blue line, and Ryan Miller as the first team All-Star goaltender. Second team All-Stars, Daniel Sedin on the left, Crosby down the middle, St. Louis on the right, Drew Doughty and Nicholas Lindstrom in the D pair, Ilya Brizgalov of the Phoenix Coyotes in net for the second team. Very interesting. All right, so now we got trades. Actually, we'll go through free agency first, because free agency is kind of interesting. A lot of names moved, but not a ton of big names. Daryl Sador goes to St. Louis. A lot of veterans moved. A lot of old veterans. A lot of guys retired. You guys like Sakic retired, Roenick retired, Claude Lemieux retired. Believe Mike Modano retired after this year. It was a lot of veterans from the previous eras, the early '90s and early and mid '90s. They were kind of passing the torch onto these young guys like Crosby and Ovechkin and Taves and Kane and Malkin and all these other guys. But Craig Anderson goes to Colorado. Marian Hossa goes to Chicago. Rolison goes to the Islanders. Mike Knuble to Washington. Brian Boucher to Philadelphia. Nikolai Khabibulin to Edmonton. If the Hawks kept Khabibulin, they would have destroyed everyone in these playoffs. Chris Chelios plays his last year in Atlanta. Mike Camilleri goes to Montreal. That's a big one. Commissar goes to Toronto, iconically. Gianta goes to Montreal. Gabrick goes to the New York Rangers. John Madden goes to Chicago. Martin Havlat to Minnesota. I really wanted the Hawks to keep him. Ty Bertuzzi goes to Detroit. Schneider goes to Vancouver. Matthew Schneider. He will not finish the year there, but veteran playing the end of his career. Pyatt goes to Phoenix. I believe that's Taylor Pyatt. Dennis Seidenberg goes to Florida. Peter Sikora goes to Minnesota. Sikora is near the end of his career, just bouncing around. Rob Niedermeyer goes to New Jersey, in which I never knew he played for New Jersey. Nick Antropok goes to Atlanta, in which I never knew he played with the Rangers before that. I knew he played with Toronto. Maxim Afinogenov went to Atlanta as well. Rob Scuderi goes to the LA Kings. Philly Lano, that's Robert Lang, goes to Phoenix. Michael Samuelson to Vancouver, I hated him in Detroit when he was with Detroit, and I hated him when he was with Vancouver because he scored a lot of big goals against the Hawks. Dominic Moore goes to Florida. Kovalev finished his career in Ottawa. Actually, I don't think he finished his career there. At this point, he's played like 20 years. Francois Beauchemin goes to Toronto. Brad May goes to Detroit. Andrew Raycroft went to Vancouver, which I completely forgot about. Matt Molson goes to the Islanders. Miroslav Shatan goes to Boston. Saku Koivu goes to the Ducks. Travis Moen to Montreal. Brendan Morrison to Washington. Patrick Eaves to Detroit. Mike Greer to Buffalo. Valkley Prospal to the Rangers, who had a very long career. Alex Tanguay to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Mike Comrie to the Edmonton Oilers. Manny Malhotra to the San Jose Sharks. Trades. June 26, 2009. Chris Pronger and Ryan Dingle are traded to Philadelphia for Joffrey Lupul, Lucas Spiza, 2 firsts and a third going to Anaheim. Pronger played pretty well in Philly. Those first, I'm not sure what they became for the Ducks, but obviously the first one that Philly got was like picked number 29 in that year's draft. And then they got eliminated in the second round the next year, so I don't know. June 27, 2009, Jay Bouwmeester is traded to Calgary for Jordan Leopold and a third going to Florida. Also on June 27, 2009, not a big trade, but I want to mention it. Brian Boyle is traded to the New York Rangers for a third going to the LA Kings. Brian Boyle plays a long while with the Rangers, and then he goes on to play with the Lightning. And, of course, he just retired now. June 30th, 2009, Scott Gomez, Tom Pyatt, and Busto are traded to Montreal for Chris Higgins, Janik, Ryan McDonough, and Valatenko. Those go to the Rangers, and this is the McDonough trade, and McDonough becomes a staple on the Rangers' blue line, and then eventually to Tampa. Chris Higgins plays all right with the Rangers, but Scott Gomez, his contract was a bit of a bane a little afterward. Even before then. July 3rd, 2009, Ryan Smith goes to the LA Kings, bringing some veteran presence for Kyle Quincy. Tom Pressing, who seems to just be bouncing around like, I don't even know, in a fifth to Colorado. July 21st, 2009, Vrbata realizes his wrongs and goes back to Phoenix for Fedoruk and David Hale going to Tampa. Vrbata always ended up back in Phoenix. That's where he belonged, except for that one year he was an all-star in Vancouver. July 21st, 2009, that's the same one. September 12th, 2009, Danny Heatley in a fifth-round pick or trade to San Jose for Milan Mikalik, Jordan Chichu, and a second going to Ottawa. Heatley demanded a trade out of Ottawa and became public enemy number 1 there. And after he nixed a trade to Edmonton, he was even more public enemy number 1. September 18th, 2009, Phil Kessel is traded to Toronto for 2 firsts and a second going to Boston. I know that first became Tyler Seguin. Pretty sure another one of those picks became Dougie Hamilton. So, Toronto Yeah, there's a reason they weren't good for a long time. When you're trading futures, when you become a bottom of the league team. October 20th, 2009, Daniel Paille is traded to Boston for a third, for a conditional fourth, and for a third and conditional fourth going to Buffalo. Paille becomes a big piece for their defensive forward core. With Boston, he wins the Stanley Cup with Boston. He eliminates Buffalo with Boston here, and he's also a big piece of that 2013 team. Very good defensive forward. January 31st, 2010, Dion Phaneuf, Sostrom, and Ollie are traded to Toronto for Matt Stajan, Nicholas Hagman, Jamal Mayers, and Ian White. I can't even defend that trade, to be honest. Yes, Phaneuf was very good when he was young with Calgary. It did not translate over to Toronto. January 31st, 2010, Jaguar is traded to Toronto for Toskala and Blake going to Anaheim. That's a fair trade for what Jaguar was at the time, but Toskala, you need to move off from him. Jason Blake was getting older, and of course he dealt with cancer in his career, so he was still playing even through that. He had leukemia and was still playing through it. So all props to Jason Blake. February 2nd, 2010. Olli Jokinen and Brandon Prust are traded to the New York Rangers for Kodalik and Higgins going to Calgary. Higgins didn't really work with the Rangers. He bounced around a bit in his career. Played with Montreal, with Calgary, with the Rangers, Vancouver. He was there. He was around a lot of places. February 4th, 2010. Ilya Kovalchuk, Samala, and a second to New Jersey for Johnny Oduya, Nick Bergfors, Cormier, a first and a second going to Atlanta. New Jersey wins this going away until they don't, when they sign that deal for Kovalchuk, and then he flees for the KHL. And honestly, the best thing Atlanta got out of that was Johnny Oduya, who they ended up giving to Chicago. Bergfors was a bust. February 6, 2010, Philly Lano is traded to Philadelphia for Tollefson and a fifth going to Detroit. Lano is a huge piece of this Philadelphia team that goes to the final. He could not replicate his performance any other year after this. Also forgot to mention, on December 15th, Philadelphia claimed Michael Layden from the Carolina Hurricanes off waivers. It wasn't a big move at the time. It was a big move by the time of the playoffs. February 9th, 2010, Kari Lettinen is traded to Dallas for Ivan Wisniewski with a fourth going to Atlanta. Wisniewski does not stay. February 11th, 2010, Dominic Moore is traded to Montreal for a second going to Florida. The reason I mention that is because Dominic Moore scores the winning goal in Game 7 against Washington. February 12th, 2010, first of Chicago's trades. Cam Barker is traded to Minnesota for Kim Janssen and Nick Leddy going to Chicago. Barker was interesting. I wouldn't consider him a full-on bust, but he never lived up to his potential. He was very good in the 2009 playoffs, and the Hawks just kind of gave up on him, I feel like, after a while, because he was a 2004 third overall pick. So he did not live up to the expectations, but they got Nick Leddy back for him, at least. March 2nd, 2010, Nick Boyd is traded to Chicago for future considerations. The reason I mention that is because he's on the ice when Patrick Kane scores the game-winning goal in overtime. March 3rd, 2010, Dennis Seidenberg and Barkowski are traded to Boston for Weller, Bitts, and a second going to Florida. Byron Bitts, bust out of Toronto. And Boston wins this trade going away with Seidenberg. March 3rd, 2010, Wojciech Wolski is traded to Phoenix for Peter Mueller, Porter, and going to Colorado. Mueller never developed really well. I had his hockey card as a kid. Wojciech Wolski, of course, he's Polish, has the Polish name, and me being Polish. That was one of my family's favorite players. March 3rd, 2010, Wisniewski goes to Anaheim for Ryan Whitney to Edmonton. So, interesting trades to say the least in this year. 2009 was the year of not many big trades. This year was the weird year of trades that would backfire horrendously for some teams. Heatley was good that first year in San Jose, didn't really follow it up. Kessel in Toronto was very good, just he was not a franchise guy. Pronger to Philadelphia worked out well. A lot of the smaller moves worked out well. It's the big moves that kind of either don't work out for anyone or work out horrendously for one of the teams involved. But that's going to be all I have for you guys in this one. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. That's the 2009-10 season. Game 7 of the Edmonton-Florida series is tonight. I am very excited. I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.